Good afternoon, everybody. A little later today because, well, I went out to check my chickens yesterday and I couldn't find one. So I went into the coop and I'm looking under and around things to try to find her because I figured she was hiding behind something. And when I went to stand up, I hit right here on the bridge of my nose one of the roosting posts and it hurt. And so today I have a headache and it's very, very sore. Don't have black eyes yet, but there's still time. So I wanted to touch base about our sourdough first. So can you see all those lovely holes, air pockets going on in there? So that is the yeast and the bacteria eating up what it's supposed to eat up. And it's starting to smell a little sour. Starting to taste a little sour too. I tried it yesterday. I fed it yesterday. I shrunk it down this morning, fed it again. So in a couple days, probably by Monday of next week, we'll be able to test it to see if the yeast has gotten strong enough that we can maybe try and bake some bread. But today we're going to make some molasses cookies. Now I personally don't like molasses cookies, but I make a pretty darn good molasses cookie. So one of the things about molasses cookies is it's going to be more of a cakey cookie. So last time we made that oatmeal chocolate chip and they got nice and thin and there was a crispiness to the edge. Well, this time around we want it to be a little fluffier and a little more like a cakey type of cookie. So in order to do that, we have to use shortening, not butter, because shortening has a higher melting point. So it's allowed to get hotter before it starts to melt and collapse. So that will allow it to stay in the cookie, giving it that moistness, but also giving it that cakiness texture. So I have half a cup of shortening right in there. And today my recipe makes a lot of cookies. And since I don't like molasses cookies, John's the only one that's going to eat them unless I package them up and tell my friends that they can come pick them up and I'll leave them at the edge of the driveway. Haven't quite decided, but regardless, we're going to make half a batch. So my recipe calls for 1 cup, but I only want to do half, so I'm going to do half a cup. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with our butter the other day. We are going to start mixing it, but the difference is shortening is already softer and it's already got it doesn't really need to whip up like we do with butter. So we're going to add the sugar right in with our shortening and whip it together. So we needed 1½ cups if I wanted a whole batch of these cookies. But because I only want half a batch, I have to cut 1½ in half. So I know that 1 cup, if it's in half, means half a cup. And 1/2 a cup, if I cut it in half, is 1/4 cup. Then if I add 1/2 and 1/4, I get 3/4 of a cup. So that is what I have in my lovely bowl here. So I'm simply going to add it to my shortening and then I'm going to mix this up and blend it up so it gets nice and fluffy and mixed really well, and then I'll come back and show you. So I'm all done with the shortening and there is our lovely shortening and sugar all mixed in. It's not quite as fluffy as when you get butter in there, but it's close. And I know I showed you my favorite spatula before and it was green. This is my favorite one when I'm working with my cookies in my mixer here because it's nice and big. And yes, it's pink, but it's because I bought it to help with the breast cancer. So I guess I can be forgiven for having a pink one, though I don't really like pink. So now that we've mixed those together, we're going to add the egg. And normally we would have 2 eggs, but because I'm cutting it in half, I only have 1 egg. It's been sitting out, so it's at room temperature. And you should always break your egg into another bowl before you add it to your mixing bowl, because if you happen to get a shell or something in there, you'll be able to fish it out and it doesn't go all into what you have already. So here's my egg. I'm going to add my egg in, and just like when we did the other cookies, we're going to mix this in 1 at a time. So if I had 2 eggs, I would do 1 egg, mix it all in, 2 eggs, mix it, put the second egg in, mix it all in, and that's because it allows the egg to get fully incorporated without having to work 2 at a time. It actually takes less time to do it that way than if you plopped both of them in at the same time. So this doesn't take very long, so we're just going to mix it a little bit like that. I'm going to show you real quick. Now it's a nice yellowy color. And I'm going to take my spatula and I just scrape down the sides because you want to make sure everything still continues to get all mixed in. And there's still a little egg that will get mixed in once I add my molasses. So molasses cookies uses molasses. Molasses is a nice, thick, syrupy sugar. And back in the pioneer days, this was really the only sugar they had access to. White sugar was something that was just starting to become part of something that could be purchased, and it was expensive, and they only used it for really special occasions because it was so expensive. So they had molasses was usually what they went to for anything to sweeten anything. So this will take a little longer to incorporate, so I'm going to blend this up and I'll be right back. So I mixed it all in there. You see that? All nice and dark now because molasses is such a dark sugar. And I don't know if you guys saw, but we were going to try me having a different mug every day. Well, this is my mug today, and it is square, which is one of the reasons I love it, because it's not a normal shaped mug. The problem is when you're drinking out of it, you have to drink out of a corner, because if I try to drink out of the flat end, it just goes all over the place, because our mouths aren't straight. So next, after we've gotten our molasses and our eggs and our shortening and our sugar all in there, we are now going to put our flour mixture in. So the regular recipe calls for 4 cups of flour. So I cut that in half, 2. And then 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. So that means I only use 1. And then 1 teaspoon of salt. So I used half a teaspoon of salt. And 1 teaspoon of ginger. So I used half a teaspoon of ginger. And I whisked it all together so that when I incorporate it, all of those things are all together. And 4 teaspoons of baking soda, so I only use 2 teaspoons of baking soda because I want this in half. So we're going to add some, because as I said when I made my oatmeal chocolate chip, I don't want it to go poof into my face with all of the flour, which has happened many times before. So we get it just started so it gets starting to get mixed in there. And then I'm going to add some more. I'm going to take my spatula, and you want to scrape down the flour on the sides because the flour is going to kind of puff up and stay on the side. So you want to make sure you're getting it all mixed in. You can always tell as it starts to get mixed in because it starts to get thicker and it doesn't just move around. You can almost, the blender, the mixer seems like it's having trouble. So there's the last of that. And I'm going to mix this all in and get it all incorporated, and then I will be back. All right, we are back. I've got it all mixed. I put it in a smaller bowl because sometimes the mixing bowl can be too big. And you'll notice it's kind of crumbly, but it's still very moist, which means it will stick together. Now the great thing about well, I don't know if it's a great thing, but you have to have nice, clean hands when you are working with molasses cookies because you're going to have to use your hands. So I have my scoop, my favorite cookie sheet, and if I didn't have cookie sheets, I would still put this on an ungreased sheet. So I get my scoop. So there's my scoop. I want to roll it into a little ball. Then I roll it in sugar. So that gives it that sugar coating that you always find whenever you have a molasses cookie. So there it is. So we're going to do 6, because that's how many I can fit on my pan. Four, 5, and 6. So these are going to bake at the same temperature as our oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, 350, and my oven just beeped to tell me that it was that exact temperature. Now sometimes your ovens might be hotter or cooler, so that's why you always want to set your timers when you're baking anything to less than what it says on the actual recipe, because if your oven is too hot, it's going to cook faster, and if it's too cool, it's not going to cook fast enough, so you need to kind of test that out there, and you always have to be able to know. So here are our 6 molasses cookies coated in sugar, sitting about 2 inches apart because they're going to spread, but these are going to be more like cakes, so they're going to get puffy instead of nice and flat and round. And I will see you guys back once I've baked these. All right, they baked for 12 minutes. The recipe said anywhere between 12 and 15, so you have to be really careful. Here they are, and I made them little, so you see they're nice and puffy and cakey. You let them sit on the pan for about a minute just so they don't crumble and fall apart. And then the bottom of them, see how nice that is? Perfect. And you don't really need a spatula. You just need something to be able to push them off onto whatever it is you're going to cool them on. Now I cool them on a metal rack because that allows, like this, because it allows the air to get up underneath as well as around the whole thing, so it can cool evenly. But you could just lay it onto a dish towel or something along those lines so that it can cool. It just might get a little moisture or a little softer underneath because that's where the heat isn't allowed to get, you're not allowed to get rid of that heat because it's sitting on top of that towel. So I'm not going to taste one because I don't like them, but I am going to break one apart so you can see the inside. See, nice and cakey. That's what that shortening does for it. If we had used butter, it would have gotten flatter. The cookie would have been flatter. It would not have been as puffy. If we had mixed butter and shortening, we would have sort of gotten a halfway in between mark. So it would have had some puff to it, but it would have still flattened out a little and gotten a little more crispy on the edges. So some cookies, like snickerdoodles, I will mix the shortening and the butter because I want both parts of that. I want it kind of crispy, but at the same time flatter and softer in the middle, which is what shortening will give me. Butter gives me the crispy. So there we have it, molasses cookies, which I don't like, but my husband does, so he'll eat them. And maybe I'll package some up and share them with a few people who have told me that they like molasses cookies too. Depends if I want to get in the car and drive around or not, but I will keep my distance. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.